You're watching the Eternal Tournament Series.
Hello. I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm great. Looking forward to casting the whole tournament today, but I've been having a fun weekend as well, enjoying the draft event. I just missed top 10, which was a bummer, but still a fun time overall. Yep. So I needed like one more win to get top 10. So, still a good run, but faltered a little at the end. Yeah. But anyways, that's enough about the event. We've got a whole day 2 of invitational goodness to cover today. Oh, something going on? Oh, that's good. Cool. All right. I'm getting word that somebody that should have been talking and being broadcasted wasn't. Rekenner's supposed to be here, and I was just inexplicably talking and responding to nothing. So now I am buying time inconspicuously while we wait for Rekenner to actually get here and host the show.
Interesting.
And
apologies, everyone.
there he is.
Yeah, we did not notice that the program we used for audio was not working for the first bit of the pregame. Apologies to everyone for that. Apologies. Okay. Whew. Well, real quick, I will run back down the information for what the Season 1 Invitational is. Again, apologies for that. Day 1 was a 7-round Swiss. 32 players in the start of the tournament get cut down to 16. Any player that got 4 wins in the Swiss was put to day 2. And so the players that did not make it to 4 wins were eliminated. And of course, day 2, today's event, is a 16-player single elimination bracket. We'll be broadcasting the one match from the round of 16, and then we'll be broadcasting all remaining matches going forward. So every match from the round of 8 and the round of 4, and then, of course, the finals. So the other big information, or the other big news for this invitational, is that we have actually doubled our prize pool. First place takes home $200 and 12 series points. Second takes $100 and 10 series points. Third and fourth take 50 and 8 series points. 5th through 8th take home $25 and 6 series points. And then 9th through 16th get 4 series points. So everyone who has made it to day 2 gets at least 4 series points. Where series points are how you qualify for Worlds at the end of the year. And it will also be used to qualify for the All-Stars event we'll be running between Seasons 2 and Seasons 3. Once again, apologies for the issue with audio that we just experienced. All right. So, a real quick listing of the players who made it to the top 16 today. We have Kamado, the returning world champion, Danabor, Faridsbro, Muxosk, Kangbreath, Tony G, Trumpets, Missing Toes, Pinman, KYU, Second Blue, Child Roland, Menu S, Magikarp, Alarmadillo, and Dr. Pringles. Those are our 16 players who have been seeded into our top 16 bracket. Seeding was done randomly for this bracket because of the nature of the modified Swiss we used. There's not a clean and clear-cut way to determine an actual seeding order because players are immediately dropped from the Swiss as soon as they hit either 4 wins or 4 losses. So there's not a clear stratification of seeding. And our players eliminated, unfortunately, we do have to eliminate players out of an elimination tournament. We're at Nyamster, Lord Foz, the Tristero, Darkness, Elissimo, Bruised by God, Flash, Croge, Jez, Outrek, Quertsy, Level 13 David, Grisalio, Unearthly, Herat, and Pupicitus. They all had some great matches yesterday, but again, unfortunately, we do have to eliminate players to actually get to a remaining final player. And so we now have some statistics about what happened in day 1. So we generally speaking see a lot of the decks that multiple people brought, the top section of this graphic didn't actually do that well. A lot of our actual rogue decks did much better in terms of both win rate and conversion ratio. A lot of one-off decks have actually made it to day 2, whereas some of the decks that people thought were powerful, or a lot of people brought, Argentport mid-range, had a 50% conversion ratio. Felm-like decks, only 1 of 3 made it. Xenon mid-range, only 1 of 3 made it and had the worst win rate of the event. But it was kind of the rogue decks that made it to day 2. Second Blue on Grenadin, Trumpets on Icaria Blue, for instance. Both players who brought decks that were their specialty, were not popular meta decks, but they made it in on 4-1 and 4-2 records. So one other interesting point of information is we kind of had 2 styles of Argentport mid-range coming into this event. The Bruised by God, Inquisitor's Blade, Crown Watch Paladin, a bit more aggressive style, and the Set 2 Impending Doom, no Crown Watch Traitor, no Inquisitor Blade style. And the Bruised by God style went 14-11, had 3 players advance, and the Set 2 style had a 43% win rate and 0 of 2 players advance. That was Unearthly and Pupicitus. So Rhino, have you been playing either of these decks recently? Do you have any thoughts on, if that might have just been some bad luck, or if the new Bruised by God style is really the superior deck?
That's a tough call. They both can do certain things differently in terms of like what removal you're trying to line up better against, because your early game's essentially the same, right? They're both playing the Warcry 2 drops at this point. It's really a call of how valuable you think Crown Watch Trader is, and it's really about like that's the big difference here, right? Crown Watch
and the Inquisitor's Blade, really.
Sure, but Inquisitor's Blade kind of goes hand in hand with the Trader in terms of giving you some evasion, where you're dropping that for a slightly different weapon, and there's some other options there, right? So Crown Watch Trader dodges Permafrost, Vanquish, Annihilate, whereas Impending Doom doesn't do all those things, but it has flying built in and can dodge Torch. They both dodge Hailstorm. So it's and I think Crown Watch Trader also wears Warcry slightly better I would say. But I think ultimately it's not a big difference one way or the other. It's just sort of coincidence, as you said. Like they're both strong cards, and they can work out in different ways. With, on ladder, maybe if you're seeing a lot of Cersos or something, well, you already have a good matchup because you're against Elysian. But maybe you'll prefer the flyer anyways. But I think ultimately it's pretty minor. I think the one big difference is against like Sandstorm Titan decks. Trader with weapons can more easily swing into that than other units. So. But again, at the end of the day, I think it's minor. But the wings are a pretty, like the Inquisitor's Blade is a pretty sweet card, and will occasionally do really busted stuff with Tavrod. But I think ultimately when you're playing something that's just doing strong things up and down the line like Argenport, the difference between your threats isn't going to be a huge difference in the long run.
Okay. Counterbob, do you have anything to add to that? I know we talked a little bit about the deck on Best of 3, so maybe your thoughts have already been kind of put out there. But now I've been very impressed by the new Bruised by God style, and haven't really played much of these older styles since, well, actually set 2.
Yeah, it's basically what Rhino said. Doom is Doom. It doesn't go into well into Sandstorm Titan. So if you're thinking the meta is going to be that more time mid-rangey, it's most likely better just to go with the Bruised by God full-on trader variant with the Blade. Even though Blade does give flying, it still gives that +3, +1, and with trader having quick draw and stuff, it just goes into better into that sort of a meta. So I think this might have been better for this weekend. For ladder, I think you'll do fine with either. They're both solid Argenport decks.
Yeah, an 8/4 quick draw flying endurance unit on the attack is fairly serious. Both as it's next to impossible to block, and it's also basically a 3-turn clock as long as they've gotten in one source of 1 damage somewhere else along the game. Given that the decks are both are running various favors, some number of instigators, although usually that number's been trimmed down a little bit. Getting in 1 damage somewhere doesn't seem terribly difficult. So, Rhino, we're going to talk about a subject somewhat near and dear to your heart, something that you're somewhat famous for. As I said earlier, we had 3 Feln-like decks in the event today. I'm kind of lumping Tin Man's Feln splash for 2 Statuary Maidens, splash for 2 Boar, splash for 7 Crests. My pet theory is that he wanted to add extra crests to the deck and was like, well, how can I justify this with a card in the main deck? But I've lumped that deck in with the other 2 Feln control decks, and they did not have a stellar day 1. The pure Feln decks both fell out. And while Tin Man went actually 4-1, the deck seemed to flounder a little bit yesterday. We recently saw the effective deletion of Vera from the deck. But then, Daraka came out. Black Sky Harbinger was given an extra strength point. If we want to call that a buff or a nerf, that's maybe up for debate. And we've seen In Cold Blood being played as a reaction to decks like Argenport. Do you think Feln was a good choice for this tournament?
Well, I always feel that Feln can be the best deck in the tournament if you build it right and have like 100% knowledge of what the meta game is that you're expecting. Because Feln has so many different tools. Its sideboard slots are so deep that you can make it work. But this metagame I think was a little tough to really nail down. And while the loss of Vara hurt, the loss of Protect on the other side I think did help Feln like overall. And also obviously Hailstorm really does help with some of its in the past weaker matchups. The problem is those matchups kind of got erased because Hailstorm existed, and then you were still playing Hailstorm anyways. But the Feln decks, as you said, only one of the 3 decks made it, but the one that did performed pretty well, and the others, you don't have a huge amount of time to turn it around. I didn't look at what matchups they ended up falling to. But I think there's still a lot of work to be done with Feln. I think one of the problems that I was seeing with the decks is that some of them were playing like 1 to 2 Gifts main deck, and I don't know if this was a great as in those Gift metagame. That's a card now that players are more prepared for than ever and have more tools to deal with it than ever, just in terms of how much Faith Aegis or other ways to deal with it now. And that used to be like Feln's big trump card back in the day when metagames got to this point where a lot of people were playing either bigger mid-range or bigger control decks. And I don't think that trump card in their pocket is quite what it used to be.
Yeah. Anything that, has to be, anything that is blocked by Face Aegis has definitely seemed to be on a downtrend since the release of set 3, with the Cobalt Waystone. That and, maybe the Gift players thought that the meta would be slightly slower than it is. Art Support mid-range, Praxis mid-range are both decks that, they're not aggro decks. They're not, 1 drop, 2 drop, 3 drop, 4 drop, you're dead. But they can kind of be 2 drop, 3 drop, 4 drop, 5 drop, you're dead. Or in Praxis's case, kind of 3 drop, 4 drop, 5 drop, 6 drop, ping you in the face for 2, draw a 0-cost torch, suddenly you're dead from 5. And so, Gift isn't great against those decks, although as a one of it, it is maybe just meant to be a silver bullet, even if they are not running Omen. But yeah, Gift is maybe past its heyday, and in some players' minds, good riddance. But one of the things I did want to point out about Tin Man's deck was he was actually running 33 total power, if you include the 4 Vara's favors as power. Where a lot of other control decks have been kind of deciding, well, I have Strategize, I have, the crests in my colors, I can use those to fish for my power drops in the early game. Whereas I noticed when I was looking at the decks last night that Tin Man is actually, running kind of a set 2-esque, power base in terms of control, where he's running, he's kind of, I guess, trying to use Strategize not just to find his power drops. Do you think that may be part of it?
Yeah, his power setup was different. Like no seek powers was awkward, at least to me. I mean, obviously it worked, but that's besides the point. I guess going for more the scout with the more off-color crests, and then you wanted to include some of the cards that you get from those colors. I think in Discord I saw him, he said he didn't even play any of those cards throughout like the whole event. I might be wrong on that. So I think it's just a Feln deck. Just Feln in general is just at an awkward spot, as we kind of hit on the points where it has so many tools to do things, but you kind of got to predict where you want to be and what the meta is going to be in order to perform well. Gift, I think, should be for like this style of event. I would just put 1 to 2 in the sideboard, had no main. And in general, Feln is just, without Vera, it's hard to kind of finish games. You're relying so hard on your Champion of Cunnings, so hard the fact that you're running Dark Return as like a 2 of, and you only have, 14, 15 units. So that's kind of can sit in your hand and die for a while. You do have Strategize to put at the bottom and whatnot, but Feln's just at a weird spot with lots of tools, but not great ways to really close out games.
Yeah. I think the Dark Return is kind of the response to that Vara. It used to be kind of the way they, games would get closed out. It kind of acts as, if you expected Vara to just bring back a Champion of Cunning and then die to some piece of removal and you were okay with that, Dark Return is kind of works like that in a sense. Obviously, they don't, blow a piece of removal on Vara. But it can come down a little cheaper. Obviously, Dark Return that into Koku is 6 costs instead of waiting until turn 8. But I think that's really what Dark Return is in the deck for. Vera could even sometimes be a dead drop, because you're right. The deck historically has only played 18, 19 units at the upper limit. And sometimes those units, if you're playing Vara to bring back a Steward of the Past or a Rindra in some matchups, that can just be effectively bringing back nothing. Both cards will just get swept up in a harsh rule didn't gain you any life. Maybe Nightfall benefits you slightly more than your opponent. But Vera bring back Koku. You couldn't clear away 1-for-1 with Harsh Rule.
The angle Vara brought to the deck though was that, as you said, Ed, it could be an 8-cost Dark Return that's bringing you an extra body, which was insane. And then in basically any matchup against a time deck, you won the game when you cast Vara because they couldn't remove it, and the game is now over. And now Feln doesn't have that kind of free win potential in some of these matchups, but it's still doing a lot of powerful things. It's just Vara is not a replaceable effect. That's why she got nerfed the way she did. She was so strong, especially with how she combined with Black Sky Harbinger and Champion of Cunning, which were both some of the strongest cards you could cast for their costs at those spots in the curve. But that being said, the fact that people are still playing Feln, it's still doing reasonably well. Again, there were only 3 decks. I think is a testament to just how deep the number of powerful tools Feln has available. Again, I think that they just have so many strong cards that even on a relatively disappointing afternoon, there's still enough promise here that it's not like people are going to give up on Feln going forward.
Yeah, it's still a very good deck. Just kind of needs to find the right list. Like right now, you're playing Channel Tempest at the top. We kind of talked about Face Aegis and stuff like that. So that's even a hard card to play at times. Sometimes it's just an 8-power removal spell, or knocking down an Aegis just to draw 3. Mm-hmm. It's kind of awkward. Like the top end of Feln is just at an odd spot. Finding the right list. I don't think Rindra's in many of the lists anymore. It's just not as good. You play it into a time deck, and they just play Sandstorm Titan. They just kind of sit there and laugh.
Yeah, and there's a chance that Feln actually starts shifting back more towards being mid-range. Like I wouldn't be surprised by that, because what would happen a lot of times when you build Feln mid-range in the past is you would start to slowly make it bigger and bigger, and then you get to a point where it's like, well, I might as well add Vara and become Feln control. And now I could see it going the other direction, where Hailstorm's an okay sweeper for a mid-range deck. We're seeing Elysian and other decks use it to that effect, and Rindra does come back in. You pair it with Impending Doom or Steward of the Pass, back it up with decent removal, and you kind of become your like a slightly bigger take on Argenport in a way, where you still have Champion of Cunning and Black Sky Harbinger or Daraka as your top end, but you have pretty good mid-range threats, and you have access to Hailstorm as a sweeper. So I wouldn't be shocked to see that shift occur at some point either, or as people just experiment with all of these different tools that Feln has available. It's just, if you want to go with Zindel's Gift at that point, you might as well go Channel the Tempest or something else on your top end, and that's where these Feln decks ended up.
Yep. Yeah, the meta's only been around for a week and a half and still figuring things out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is a good thing to note that, of course, Feln Control is still the best deck in the game at being able to pop Face Aegis and then get through their powerful face affecting effects. Vara's Favor is still the best Face Aegis breaker in the game. So they aren't as weak as other decks. They're not running Steward, which is like the 8th way to break Face Aegis painlessly, but some decks can be more damaged by that than others, is what I'm trying to get at.
I will say one of the other things of note that's cropped up now as I've played Feln a little bit more is how much weaker you are to Feln to Killer Dawnwalkers, where before you generally didn't have to worry about those because Steward dealt with them, and now you have to be really smart about your Steward of the Past time and try and deal with that threat out of time decks. So that's a dynamic that I think players will have to adjust to going forward as well. Is normally as a Feln player, you're always happy to see Dawnwalkers on the other side of the table, and now that's not always the case. They can actually make an impact in games.
Yeah, and a Dawnwalker plus an initiation is one of the cleanest ways to kill a Champion of Cunning in the game. Risen 4 Runehammer being like basically one of the other only 1-for-1 answers. So we're going to, from here, just do a quick check-in on our top 8 predictions that aReNGee and I did. Obviously, we are only at the top 16 at the moment, so we will mostly cover this on Best of 3 on Tuesday, where one of me or aReNGee will get relentlessly mocked for not predicting as well as the other. So aReNGee and I are both missing Bruised by God and Unearthly. Kind of two of the more unexpected drops from day one. That I'm missing level 13 David, and aReNGee is missing Harad. Speaking of Felon Control players dropping out, unfortunately for Harad. So, our last segment of the morning before we actually get into tournament coverage itself, which will be in round about 15 minutes. So we have our bracket for day 2, and we're going to be doing a real quick rundown of just who we think is going to win each of these 8 matches, and if we have a little bit of extra time, we might start predicting into like the top 8, etc., etc. And so, first, our first matchup that we're going to talk about will actually be our first feature match. So we're going to jump down a little bit in the bracket, which is Farad's Bro versus alarmadillo. So Farad's Bro is on Skycrag aggro. He was one of those one-of decks that blazed its way through day 1, had a 4-0 record, didn't look back. And alarmadillo, he is actually our last player on Xenon in the tournament. Bruised by God was on a bigger Xenon list, and Quertsy was on another Xenon mid-range list, and both of them did not manage to make day 2. So, Bob, who do you think is the favor in the Skycrag versus Xenon matchup?
In this amount of games, I think it goes to Xenon, but there's always a chance that Skycrag just comes out super quick and you just don't have the tools to deal with it. So it's almost 50-50 in that sort of sense. But if alarmadillo can just, put down the early blockers, like Wasp can just get in the way of things. Like they have a lot of cheap costing things to get in the way, whereas some of these other mid-rangey decks are a little bit slower. Plus you have the life gain from Aeon, and Sandstorm's Titan is just hard to get through in general. But if you don't see those types of cards, and Skycrag can just come out as fast as we know it can just run over you. So yeah. It's going to be interesting to see how quickly Skycrag can get ahead and how much alarmadillo can play from behind.
Yeah, certainly. I really think, well, you're correct that Skycrag can really cheese out, air quote, cheese out, any deck in the game. They can just have the unbeatable draw where, even a time deck doesn't find one of its, it's not find its Sandstorm Titan. The Skycrag player draws exactly enough torches plus permafrost to get rid of every annoying blocker. And, on the play, slam an Oni Ronin, turn 2, slam perma plus, Pyro Knights, turn 3, et cetera, play Champion of Fury and get rid of another blocker sort of deal. And those draws can be really unbeatable. And it's kind of one of the draws to playing the deck.
Mm-hmm.
You want those draws that your opponent just really can't interact with. That's kind of the aggro deck advantage. But looking at alarmadillo's list, he didn't get greedy.
No.
Some players, would maybe look at this meta game and go, well, the meta's going to slow down. I don't need things like Blister Sting Wasp in the main. I don't need as many, anti-aggro cards. Where alarmadillo is on 4 Blister Sting Wasp.
Yeah, he also has 4 Sauropods.
Yeah, that's a little slower. Little slower.
They just can get in the way. You're going to have those big, chunky guys to get in the way, turn 5, turn 6.
Yeah. And he's on 4 Vara's Choice, which is a little less good against Skycrag than other decks, just because they can just immediately get rid of everything in their hand. If you're on the play, if the Skycrag deck is on the play and the Xenon deck is on the draw, and maybe they don't have an undepleted power to play in turn 2, by the time it gets to turn 3, it might be too late to point a Vara's Choice at the opponent's face because they've already played 4 1-drops. That's all they need to swing at you. And causing your opponent to pick up a 1-cost unit doesn't feel so good.
Yeah,
sure, it might save you 2 health next turn, but it doesn't cost them hardly any tempo at all to play it back. But still, I'm going to give this one to alarmadillo. Maybe he's not as advantaged as he would like going into the matchup, but I still think he is a favorite.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I would definitely give it to Armadillo. I think it's going to be closer than some people might think. But who knows? I could be wrong.
Well, of course. I mean, this is a card game tournament. We're not saying that this is going to be set in stone. We're just kind of trying to predict for fun. So our next matchup, going back to the actual top of the bracket, is Missing Toes versus Hey Why You. Missing Toes is on kind of what could be considered his signature deck, which is Elysian Midrange. It's the deck he played in the Season 5 Last Chance Qualifier and then the Season 5 Invitational where he took second. And Hey Why You is on Argenport Midrange. He's on the, we talked about earlier, the kind of Bruised by God style. This is an interesting matchup. Generally speaking, I would say Elysian is kind of the king of mid-range matchups. Cerso, especially when given killer, can just do absolutely filthy things. You think you have a good blocker, you think you have, you stabilized, and down comes a Cerso, killer effect played on it, your best blocker is dead, suddenly the rest of the board can crash in for 8 or 10 damage, and suddenly the game that you thought you had under control is now gone. Or just even without a killer effect, Cerso swinging in is very hard to block if your goal is a smaller number of fatties. If you're playing tokens or even Temple Scribes and stuff like that, sometimes you can put together 3 blockers you don't care about. But mid-range decks have a difficult time putting together 3 blockers that they don't care about. But of course we also see 2 Crystallize, a couple of Daraka, 4 Predatory Carnosaur in Toes' list. He's going for a heavy top end list.
Yeah, he's on 43 units, so he can clog up that board real well. Where Archport's usually, they're playing a couple more 2-drops now, but they're still not clogging up the board. We have Practice Displacer at 4. All these high-end drops with Daraka and Predatory Connoisseur can just kill those 1 or 2 things that are out there and just clear the way for Cersos and stuff like that. It's going to be close, but I kind of feel like I'm going to give it to Missing Toes in this one, just because there's just so many things to deal with, and the board's just going to be very clogged, and without like a harsh rule or like any wide way to really deal with these things, it's going to be, I think, kind of rough for the Archport deck.
Generally speaking, Argenport was kind of the anti-time mid-range, but I actually have to agree with you on this one that I think this is a little bit favored toward Missing Toes. Just kind of the how much of his deck is a little bit bigger than usual. Usually the way Argenport takes care of time mid-range decks is play removal on all your stuff until you're out of stuff, swing with Tavrod once or twice to gain card advantage back, and then just win the game. But it is very hard to swing into Missing Toes' board states than it is for a usual time mid-range deck. But we'll see if that actually plays out that way, or if the power of Inquisitor's Blade or the power of Tavrod can pull Hey Why You through.
Yeah, you can even see Slow coming from the sideboard, making those Tavrods cost 10. So
yeah,
that would be rough.
Yeah, Slow and Praxis Displacer are definitely very good cards against Argenport midrange in that regard. Argenport midrange is not a deck that wants to get up to 8 power or 10 power. As long as it hits a 4-drop or better, that card is basically, you may as well have played Thoughtseize. And also, especially because if the game goes to that late, if a 10 cost Tavrod can be played, you're kind of actually playing into the way Elysian wants to play, which is build up the biggest board possible, crystallize, swing at you for 50. Your 1 Tavrod may still be standing, not stunned, but they're going to swing around you.
Yep.
So next up, we have Magikarp versus Kang Breath. So we saw both of these players on stream yesterday, and this is actually a Praxis mid-range mirror. So both of these decks are, of course, very similar decks, being there's not a ton of variation in Praxis mid-range. So the difference is Kang Breath does not have World Bear Behemoth in the main. He is running 2 Twin Brood Sauropod. Magikarp is running Shatterglass Mage, World Bear Behemoth in the main. They're both running, 4 Heart of the Vault. Magikarp has 1 extra Predatory Carnosaur. Magikarp is running 4 Reliquary Raider in the main. And so it's King Breath is running Crimson Firemaw. Really, I find this a very hard matchup to predict. There are little bits and pieces both ways that, Predatory Carnosaur is an insane card in the matchup. If you get a Xenoobelisk down, Predatory Carnosaur, if you get the Xenoobelisk advantage, I should say, Predatory Carnosaur can eat any card in the mirror. But Magikarp is also running Reliquary Raider, which is probably just going to end up being a 3-cost cantrip at worst, or rather at best, and that's a pretty bad case scenario. King Breath has 2 Friendly Wisp, whereas Magikarp has 0. There's a lot of little, this deck is better than the other in one way and back and forth. When we look at the sideboards, I will say I think King Breath with 4 Scorpion Wasp definitely has an advantage there.
Yeah, definitely. He also has the 3 displacers in the main.
Yeah, that's another big example of a way he could come out ahead. So, while really this could go either way, I'm giving this just a touch to King Breath. How about you?
Yeah, I think in the mirror, his deck is just a little bit better suited. The Reliquary Raider is just going to be a Torch or a Purify target, or just a 1/3 sit there. King Breath has the Friendly Wisp to draw some extra cards, the Displacers for some extra tempo, just some more meat and potatoes to his deck. And I think it's just going to help him in this mirror matchup.
Okay. And so next up is Manu S versus Trumpets on the FJP versus FJP sorta mirror. We see Manu on plate and Trumpets on Ikaria blue. To some extent, Aegis units and Aegis threats give control decks fits. But to some extent, it's FJP plate is a very slow, bordering on mid-range aggro deck that gives the control decks just, if they can play Wisdom of the Elders on 3 without already looking at a 5 life disadvantage for doing so, you've already kind of maybe given them just enough breathing room, just enough to, sure, they'll be paying 10 or 15 life down the road, absorbing a hit from a Sheltering Rider or 2, maybe they'll a plate will come down, but it won't be just, it'll get them to 4 or 5, but it won't be a lethal swing. And then they'll turn everything around, Torch to break the Aegis, Harsh Rule, suddenly they're up 3 or 4 cards, and the FJP plate deck is like, where can I get this last little bit of reach? But on the other hand, if they come out, if the FJP plate deck doesn't have influence issues, manages a Vadius on 3, into Sheltering Rider on 4, plate one of them up, you can be dead on turn 6.
The Ikaria blue deck, in addition to having 4 Vanquish, has 2 Aneen's Choice, so those units get big. It has 6 ways to deal with it.
Yeah.
Hailstorms in the deck, get rid of them before they get the plates. If they're equipping things with Hammer of Might, you have Caleb's Choice to just kill the Hammer of Might. So there's lots of ways for interaction, and these plate decks are a turn or 2 slower than your normal average aggro deck, so it could give them enough time to build up to these cards, maybe get their Auric Runehammer out and kill a unit before it gets one of these attachments. So it's going to be interesting to see how quickly a Manu can Voltron up some of these units and get them to survive. And if Trumpets can survive those few turns and set up this removal and just sit behind a Dice Show or a Ikaria, it could go his way pretty easily.
Yeah. This isn't a matchup I actually have a lot of experience with. But I think this is very slightly favored to Trumpets. I have personally not played this matchup terribly often. You don't see I've played a little bit of Icaria Blue recently, but you don't really see a ton of FJP played on ladder. At least I haven't. I've seen a smattering.
Yeah, I'm
I may
not
have
too
just missed
experienced with it either.
All right, next we have Tin Man on Feln Scar versus Feln air quote Scar. Again, splashing for 2 Statuary Maiden and then 2 Boar in the sideboard. Although I believe, the Boar has not really been a big factor for him. Although it might if he wins and then Danabor wins, because Chalice seems to be the matchup he'd bring Boar in for. But Feln versus Argenport midrange. And as a note, Tin Man's deck is running In Cold Blood, the anti-justice hate card. He's running the full 4 of in the main, not even sideboard.
Yep. So it could go his way if he sees so. But there's also the interesting interaction of In Cold Blood and Statuary Maiden, where they become cudgels before it reads and removes them from the deck. So something to watch out for. But you do have the Hailstorms for the early units. It's definitely going to be an interesting matchup. Argenport is just a solid deck overall. But with Felon, you have all this removal, all these ways to deal with them. And then you have Champion Cunning on top. And even Daraka can slow down some of their units and force them to deal with a big 7/7. So it's going to be pretty close. This is probably one of the closer matchups, I think. I haven't played Felon into this new style of Argenport, so I'm not totally sure how it feels. But with In Cold Blood and all this removal, I would kind of lean a little bit towards Tin Man.
Yeah, I've actually been playing a lot of the various iterations of film that have been popping up in the last week or so. I've actually been playing a lot of them on ladder recently, and while I'm still a little questionable on the design of In Cold Blood, it definitely can do work against decks that are relying on Tavrods or Moktos or et cetera, et cetera. I mean, all these decks aren't running Mokto. They are still running, of course, the 4 Tavrod. And it really just feels like, the way Argenport mid would win that matchup prior to In Cold Blood, in set 2 was, they'd have Tavrod plus, they'd have one more Tavrod or Protect or Sabotage than you had removal spells that could hit Tavrod, of course.
Yeah.
If you're playing Feln, your opponent slams a Tavrod. Ha! Death Strike. They slam another Tavrod, and you look at your hand and go, I don't have an answer for that. And then you die.
Yeah. You can get to spots, though, where In Cold Blood's your only removal. You want to save it for a Tavrod where you're getting hit with,
yeah, of course,
like a Orc Interrogator or a Commando with a blade on it. And you're like, I need to use this here. So there's always that situation.
But really, it seemed like the way Felon lost was multiple Tavrods, and suddenly, that is less of a concern with the deck running fewer Sabo and the multiple Tavrod in hand case possibly just being answered by one card.
Yeah.
So generally, I would say this matchup is now slightly Felon favored.
Yeah, I would agree. Just slightly, though.
So our next matchup, actually, unfortunately, it looks like we are kind of out of time. So let's lightning round real quick. Danabor versus Dr. Pringles. Chalice versus FJS Armory. Hot take. Who wins?
Danabor Chalice, just because I want to make people mad.
As a longtime Armory player, sadly, I have to agree with you. I think Armory cannot really beat Chalice effectively, although his deck does run 3 Icaria, which is kind of the trump card. All right, second blue versus Muxask.
I wish
Grenadin versus FDP Moment. We saw that round 1 yesterday. Who wins?
I wish they would both win and be in the finals, but I kind of want Muxask to win just because Kirax in the finals would be sweet.
He did win the round 1 matchup yesterday, so I have to agree with he'll run it back. And finally, the 2 remaining players from Worlds, Kamado, Child Roland. Kamado on FJS removal, Child Roland on AP mid. Kamado takes this. It's unfortunate for Child Roland, but removal pile was built with one purpose in mind, and that was Argenport midrange needs to die.
Pretty much. I agree.
All right. So, unfortunately, we didn't get to analyze the last 3 of those, but we're starting tournament coverage in round about 5 minutes. So, I will once again thank Counterbob, and Sir Rhino for joining me on the pregame show. Sorry, we had some audio issues and we're a bit late this morning. But hopefully you all enjoyed the pregame show, and we will be back with tournament coverage in 5. Rhino, you have anything to say before we go?
I'm ready. That's all I
Awesome.
got to say. Also, shout out to Yottabyte, who apparently is second in the draft event, and they just threw us the host not too long ago, so we appreciate that support.
Yeah. I saw that. Thanks again, Yottabyte. You've always been, your pre-ETS tournament or pre-tournament streams have always been pretty great to watch when I've been setting up and have been awake early enough. And Bob, you have anything to say?
Good luck to all the players. Hopefully you guys all have great games. It's more interesting to watch those sort of games than one person drawing all power. So hopefully we have great games and everyone enjoys the whole day.
Indeed. All right. Like I said, we'll be back for tournament coverage soon with Sir Rhino and Mark, aka Chibi Kawaii, as our casters.